There comes a moment in every man's life when something begins to shift. The fire that once burned so brightly starts to dim. The woman who once consumed his every thought, whose presence lit him up, whose touch pulled him into orbit, now barely stirs a flicker. It's not because he's angry, not because someone else has come along. It's something deeper, something far more unsettling. He's seen through the illusion. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer saw it before the rest of us. He didn't sugarcoat it. He called passion what it truly is, not a gift of love, but a trick of nature. A powerful compulsion designed not for joy, but for reproduction. As poetic as love may seem, its end goal isn't happiness, it's legacy. It's about creating the next generation. That's the truth Schopenhauer laid bare in the world as will and representation. In other words, what we thought was fate was actually biology. What we labeled as falling in love was really our DNA hijacking our thoughts and emotions. And once nature either gets what it wants or realizes it won't get it through her, the curtain falls. The hunger fades. The obsession quiets. And suddenly, you're left wondering what happened. But here's the thing. Nothing is wrong with you. You're not malfunctioning. You're waking up. Maybe it started with a podcast. Something you heard that echoed what you were already feeling deep inside. That men aren't the endlessly insatiable creatures society makes them out to be. That this drive we carry, it's not limitless. It's selective. It burns fiercely in the presence of novelty, polarity, mystery. But place it in routine, in domestic familiarity, it dies silently. Modern relationships, especially the cohabiting kind, are built on a romantic ideal, sharing everything, living under one roof, being completely intertwined. But Schopenhauer would scoff at this. He'd say, "You're trying to preserve desire while killing the very conditions that created it." He'd argue that you've taken a sacred instinct and stuck it under fluorescent lighting. You've dissected the dream and expected it to sing. Desire doesn't survive overexposure. That's not just opinion. It's a biological reality. The podcast might have mentioned something called the Westermarck effect. It's a well-documented phenomenon. People raised in close sibling-like environments develop a deep aversion to each other as potential mates. It's not resistance, it's absence. They don't feel desire at all. Now think about long-term relationships. A man wakes up every day beside the same woman. He hears the same complaints, participates in the same rituals, watches her navigate every mundane moment. Over time, mystery vanishes, polarity dissolves, and his deeper instincts respond not out of coldness, but clarity. They whisper, "This is no longer what we're seeking." Schopenhauer put it this way: what is decided by it is not the weal or woe of the present individual, but the existence and special nature of the human race in future times. Translation: your cravings, your obsessions, your infatuation. None of it was ever fully about you. It was about the species, about reproduction. Nature does not care about your pleasure, your loyalty, or your lifelong partnership. Once its goal is met or no longer possible, it pulls back. Not out of malice, but by design. And suddenly you're sitting in silence, questioning yourself, wondering what's changed, thinking maybe you've failed. But Schopenhauer gives you something that modern pop psychology can't: dignity. A philosophical dignity. He says plainly, when your appetite fades, it's not a defect, it's a message. The system has completed its task. You're not broken, you're free now, if you dare to be. That's the part no one tells men, that freedom can feel like emptiness, that peace often shows up as apathy. that when the urge subsides, it doesn't mean you've failed, it means you've evolved. The sexual impulse is the most intense craving we experience. It hijacks the mind, overpowers the will, drives us like madness. But what happens when that madness lifts? You don't collapse, you don't crumble, you start to see, the fog clears, the trance breaks, and what remains is clarity, the kind of clarity you feel after escaping something dangerous, something spellbinding. You no longer see her through that golden haze. You see her as she is, familiar, finite, human. You may still love her. You may still respect her. But that roaring fire, it's barely embers now. This isn't indifference. This is sobriety. Schopenhauer wrote, "The lover imagines he is pursuing his own interest, while in truth he is serving an interest foreign to himself, the species. That's the betrayal most men never recognize, that our deepest passions, our most poetic declarations, were never entirely ours. We were players in a primal ritual, a beautiful trick, a biological sleight of hand with only one purpose, propagation. And once that goal is gone, the ritual loses its power." Modern relationships unintentionally fast-track this awakening, not because we don't love, but because the structure itself accelerates disillusionment. The more familiar two people become, the more predictability replaces passion. Sharing bathrooms, folding laundry, watching each other fall apart and rebuild daily. These aren't just acts of closeness. They're eros killers. They flatten tension. They dissolve polarity. And they bury desire beneath routine. The podcast's nod to the Westermarck effect wasn't random. It's key. Kids raised as siblings don't desire each other because nature hardwired them not to avoid stagnation, to avoid inbreeding. The same thing happens in modern couples who cohabit like siblings, experience everything together, and over time find the romantic spark flickering out. She becomes more emotionally intimate, but less physically compelling. And men feel this acutely. Yet there's no language for this in our culture, no space for it in therapy, no safe way to say I don't feel the fire anymore without being shamed or diagnosed. Society says you're broken, immature, detached. But Schopenhauer, he knew better. He knew that nature is not our ally. It doesn't care if you're fulfilled in your marriage. It only cares that you chase long enough to reproduce. That's all. The chase is the illusion. The climax is the collapse. After that, the mask drops and the goddess becomes a girl again. This is the real shift. Men don't lose interest in women. They lose interest in illusion. What fades isn't your masculinity. It's the fantasy that real intimacy and sustained desire can peacefully coexist in routine. They can't. Not under the same roof, not in the same rhythm, not under the same relentless exposure. And this is where we'll pause. This is why traditional societies were built so differently. The podcast touched on this too. Back then, men spent the majority of their time with other men working hunting building. Women raised children in tight-knit female circles. The time men and women spent together was intentional, even sacred. It wasn't constant, it wasn't saturated. And that scarcity preserved tension, that distance maintained desire. In today's world, we've flipped the model. We chase constant closeness, assuming that more time equals more intimacy. But the truth is, more access leads to more familiarity, and that familiarity breeds indifference, especially for men who once believed they'd always crave her. But here's the truth, you were never supposed to always crave her. You were supposed to awaken. Schopenhauer wasn't just talking about lust. He was diagnosing the entire human condition. And his diagnosis was sobering. When the craving fades, It's not a sickness, it's the beginning of sanity. Because what most men call love, Schopenhauer called captivity, a biological trick dressed up in flowers and fireworks. When the spell lifts, when the haze dissolves, a man finds himself staring at a world he no longer understands. The same woman who once made his heart race now feels ordinary. Not because she's changed, but because the illusion has died, and society has no ritual for this death. There's no ceremony to mark the end of craving, no vocabulary for the quiet grief that follows. So men suffer in silence. They wonder if they've aged out of attraction, if their testosterone is low, if they've lost their edge. But what they've really lost is the lie, and no one warned them that this was part of the journey. That feeling you sometimes get after sex, that wave of emptiness, the almost spiritual disgust that no one talks about. That's not shame, that's not guilt, that's nature stepping away. The will has done its job, the strings go slack, the drive recedes. And in that quiet you realize something uncomfortable. You are never fully in control. This isn't a romantic idea, but it's real. And for the man whose awakening reality often feels like loss before it feels like freedom, the podcast framed this through a simple truth: prolonged exposure kills desire. Not because you stop loving her, but because you stop being able to imagine her. Mystery is gone. The unknown is dead. And for most men, that unknown, however subtle, was the very fuel of their fire. See, men are told they're visual creatures, but what they rarely hear is that they're psychological creatures too. It's not just about how she looks, it's about what she represents. Desire feeds off tension, polarity, contrast. Once she becomes fully known, completely mapped out emotionally, mentally, physically, there's no room left for projection. The dance ends, and that isn't your fault. This is exactly why even the most stunningly beautiful woman can eventually become invisible to the man she lives with if the polarity is lost. Because the body doesn't chase beauty alone, it chases meaning, it chases that feeling of potential just out of reach. And when that tension dies, when the mystery is gone, the drive turns inward or disappears altogether. What modern marriage does, especially in its current form, is it speeds up this erosion. It promises lifelong passion while systematically killing the conditions that passion requires. Emotional transparency, total availability, shared calendars, mutual routines. These things are not bad in and of themselves, but together they blur the boundaries that keep desire alive. What happens instead? The couple becomes like siblings. Not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they've become too close, too known, too merged. And longing suffocates under sameness. And here's the cruel twist. When men feel their desire slipping, they're blamed. They're told they're immature, avoidant, non-committal. But in truth, they're just responding to something deeper, something primal. They're experiencing what Schopenhauer called the withdrawal of the will. That force inside every man, the will to life, it's like a god. It demands, it deceives, it rewards briefly, then disappears. And when it leaves him holding the shell of what once moved him. Still warm, still familiar, but hollow. And if he tries to force himself to want what no longer stirs him, if he clings to it out of obligation or fear, he begins to rot from the inside out. But if he lets go, if he surrenders to the silence, he steps into the only space society has never prepared him for: peace. Now, peace isn't as glamorous as passion. It's not going to make your heart race. It's not going to get written into pop songs or plastered on movie screens. It's quiet, it's still, but it's real. And it's what waits on the other side of desire if you're brave enough to stop chasing. Schopenhauer understood this. He said it simply, a man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. You can choose your actions, but you can't choose what ignites your hunger. And once that hunger fades, it cannot be summoned by force, because it was never yours to begin with. It belonged to nature, to biology, to the species. And once its job is done, it leaves. What remains isn't emptiness, it's clarity. But here's the tragedy. Clarity is often misread as depression. When a man no longer feels that relentless pull to pursue, to prove, to conquer, he's labeled broken, disengaged, even defective. But what if he's not? What if that silence he feels is the beginning of truth? Schopenhauer believed in asceticism not because he hated life, but because he understood it. He saw the chase, the desire, the longing, not as virtues, but as traps, beautiful, intoxicating traps. And he said enough. He pointed to a different path, one not built on conquest, but on release, not fueled by infatuation, but by insight, not defined by what you want, but by what you can walk away from. That's the part no one teaches men: the strength in surrender, the power in not needing what used to control you. And that's why when your desire fades, it's not a failure, it's the start of your evolution. You've outgrown the spell. There's a quiet revolution happening in the hearts of men, a shift so subtle, so private, that even those living through it can't quite explain what's happening. They just know they feel different, less reactive, less compelled, less hypnotized by the same fantasies that once ruled them. At first they panic, then they mourn, and finally, if they're paying attention, they start to understand. They're not becoming less of a man, they're becoming more of themselves. Schopenhauer didn't write to entertain, he wrote to liberate, and in his most piercing observations he laid out the true path to freedom, not through chasing desire, but through outgrowing it, not by stoking the flame, but by stepping out of the fire altogether. He wrote, the more clearly we think, the more we shall see that the real aim of life is not enjoyment, but the negation of the will. Negation of the will, the quiet rebellion against the endless chase, the refusal to keep dancing for a master that never had your peace in mind. The man who can look at his past obsessions, his conquests, his cravings, his compulsions and walk away is not broken. He is finally whole. That's the paradox, isn't it? The world says masculinity is about hunger, about pursuit, about proving desire through conquest. But what if real masculinity is about restraint? What if it's measured not by how much you want, but by what you no longer need? What if losing interest isn't collapse, but transformation? This awakening is a rite of passage no one talks about. There's no celebration when you stop needing what you used to chase. No applause for the man who no longer finds his worth in being wanted. But maybe there should be. Because once the fog lifts, once the golden glow of fantasy burns off, you're left with something rarer than lust. You're left with truth. The truth that most of what you called intimacy was actually dependency. That what you once called love was often biological addiction. That the chemistry you swore was fate was just your instincts tricking you into continuing the species. And in the stillness of fading desire, you suddenly have room to think, to reflect, to create, to observe. You step back from the stage and see the entire production for what it was. Not a divine love story, but but an evolutionary strategy dressed in perfume and poetry. Let's go back to something the podcast said, that when physical longing erodes, it's not because love is gone, but because mystery is. When a woman becomes too known, her psychic allure fades. It's not her fault. It's not your fault. It's the architecture of the mind reacting to saturation, to overexposure, to the evaporation of polarity. And men, especially men, are wired for polarity. That distance is not a bug in the system. It's the very thing that sparks the fire. Once she becomes fully integrated into your life, once every surprise becomes routine, once every moment is shared, explained, processed, what's left to long for? You don't desire what you already have. You don't chase what's already sitting beside you. And that doesn't mean something is wrong with your relationship. It means something has changed in your perception. You see, men are not just aroused by skin or scent. They're aroused by otherness, by something slightly unreachable. And when a woman becomes emotionally available 24/7, when every corner of her being is laid bare, the illusion of otherness dies. And with it, so does the craving. So what do we do with this? How do we live with this truth without becoming cynical or disconnected? It starts by recognizing that this isn't personal. It's not about her. It's about you outgrowing the game. And once that happens, you'll notice something strange. The more you see, clearly, the more you'll be blamed. You'll be told you're cold, that you've changed, that you're avoiding emotional depth. But in reality, you're not avoiding anything. You're just done pretending. Schopenhauer wrote about the will like it was a puppet master. And when the will is active, it commands you to chase, to want, to burn. But when it leaves, when its mission is over, it drops the strings. You're left holding a memory of fire, but no heat. The form remains. The desire does not. And if you force it, if you fake it, if you stay only out of guilt, you start to rot. But if you walk away, you step into the only state the world never prepared you for: stillness. Peace. Peace isn't loud, it doesn't thrill, it doesn't flood you with dopamine, it's not cinematic, but it's real. It's what lies beyond the chase, beyond the need to prove yourself, beyond the belief that your worth is tied to how intensely you desire or how often you perform. Peace is what awaits the man who stops mistaking compulsion for love. To the outside world, you might look like you've lost something. You're no longer chasing. You're no longer performing. You've stopped dancing for an invisible master. But you haven't lost anything. You've gained something. Clarity. Schopenhauer once wrote, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." And that's it, isn't it? You can't force desire, you can't fake hunger, and you can't reignite a fire that was never really yours. It belonged to biology, to nature, to the species. And once its work is done, it walks away. What's left behind isn't emptiness, it's power. But clarity often wears the mask of depression. The man who no longer wants is labeled numb, flat, disengaged. But what if he's not broken? What if he's finally free? Schopenhauer didn't call for denial. He called for detachment. He didn't say you should hate life, only that you should stop expecting it to complete you through indulgence. That's the gift he offered, not more hunger, but less. Not more obsession, but distance. Not addiction to the fire, but the wisdom to walk away from it. Men hear this clearly. Your fading desire doesn't mean you failed. It means you've awakened. You've crossed the invisible threshold where the spell stops working. You've lived enough, learned enough, suffered enough to see the pattern, and now you have a choice. You can keep trying to force a fire that's already gone cold, or you can claim your mind back. This right here is your real initiation. Not your first kiss, not your first relationship, not your wedding, but this moment when you can look at the thing you once worshipped and feel peace instead of longing, not because you're empty, but because you've evolved.
You don't need the illusion anymore. You've outgrown the story.
And if these words resonate, if you've made it this far, then it's time to speak to the men around you who are silently struggling, who think they're broken, who blame themselves for what's simply a natural evolution.
Share this with them. Show them the truth.
Like the video. Subscribe if you want more of these hard truths, and support the channel using the link in the description, because if we don't say these things, no one will.
You are not broken.
You're becoming free.
And that is the beginning of everything.